Lacey.
And I'm Sam.
Welcome to Monster Soup and Creature Brews, the podcast where we talk about all things monster movies, big, small, creepy, or downright ridiculous.
From movie monsters to cryptids lurking in the shadows of folklore, we're here to explore them all. So kick back, grab a snack,
or a drink,
and let's dive into some monster-filled mayhem.
On tonight's episode, we're going to be recapping Kong Skull Island, and Sam is going to start us off here with the official synopsis.
After the Vietnam War, a team of scientists explores an uncharted island in the Pacific, venturing into the domain of the mighty Kong, and must fight to escape a primal Eden.
Okay. ChatGPT explains it badly as, a group of overconfident humans goes on an unplanned jungle tour, annoys the local wildlife, and gets repeatedly smacked around by a giant gorilla who really just wants to be left alone. Meanwhile, some oversized lizards try to crash the party, forcing everyone to realize that maybe Kong isn't the worst thing on the island.
That's a good synopsis.
There, yeah.
It's pretty close.
They're not wrong. They're not wrong. So, for our recap tonight, the movie opens with the usual vintage video footage, newspaper clippings, academic papers, drawings, just really like a Rolodex of vintage type imagery. And then we see that it's 1944, and two airplanes are crashing, and their pilots eject. Just before the crash, they land into what looks like some sandy dunes. And then one pilot starts running towards the other, and pulls out a very old-looking pistol and shoots at him and misses, a la Stormtrooper style. The next pilot then attempts to shoot the first pilot, but this pilot has a katana and pulls that out and begins to chase the first pilot through the jungle. They start to get into a fight. Then the American pilot grabs the katana with his hands, which I maintain should have cut his hands off, or at least really hurt them. And then as they're struggling with that sword, we see a giant gorilla face loom up over the ridge and stop them mid-fight. We find out later in the movie that the American pilot is Hank Marlowe and the Japanese pilot is named Gunpei Ikari. Then we flick forward to 1973 and we see Bill Randa, who is played by John Goodman from Monarch, and his colleague Houston Brooks, who Randa hired because he wrote a paper on the Hollow Earth theory, which says that there are pockets of Hollow Earth, and in these pockets there's a vast underground world, which is home to various monstrous creatures, or in the previous movie, Mutos. Brooks believes that this new island they've discovered, Skull Island, is a key access point to the subterranean realm, and that it has passages that allow the creatures to come to the surface, and they would like to explore this island so that they can find proof of these creatures in their existence.
Essentially, humans getting into shit they shouldn't be getting into.
Yeah, pretty much. While Randa and Brooks are walking inside this government building, we see old school TVs reporting about the ending of the Vietnam War. Randa is worried they won't be able to access the island anymore, just due to politics and funding and everything else now that the war is ending. So they go and they convince the government that they should sponsor them to lead an expedition to Skull Island.
And somehow they do that.
They are successful in doing that with very little proof.
Yeah, the senator's just like, yeah, for sure. You're that guy. Let's do it.
We then next see a military base with Vietnam soldiers playing cards, shooting the shit, talking about what they want to do when they get home. They're just a couple days away from being sent home. And then we see Lieutenant Colonel Packard, who is Samuel L. Jackson, because he's in everything, I swear. In his office, he disagrees with the way the war is ending, and we see him talking with a Jack Chapman, who tells him that after the war, he's got a job lined up, and that his wife Grace and his son Billy are just waiting for him to get there in Atlanta. We then see the colonel pull out a box, and he has a bunch of war medals and awards in that box. And then he looks very depressed and contemplative, and we just sort of see him chilling at his desk for a little while. The next scene, we see Packard taking a phone call in the rain, and he is accepting an assignment for his men to do what he is told is a surveying operation for a bunch of scientists called Lancet. which seems unfair to me because they were all about to go home and really looking forward to that, and psych, you've got to go on a surveying mission. We then transition to Saigon. Randa wants to hire a tracker. He wants someone to be able to lead them through the jungle without military allegiance. We see a very shady looking bar, strip club, brothel. They don't really define it. But there's a lot of smoke, alcohol, and half-naked women.
Yeah, I think gambling den
probably... Oh, yeah, maybe that's better.
Is a probably apt description for that place. Because it had, like you said, a little bit of everything. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like how it is in Asia sometimes. They just, have everything.
And this is where we get our first look at James Conrad, who is Tom Huddleston, former SAS British intelligence. He beats the absolute shit out of some guy while playing pool, just from brains him. They sit down, they start to discuss, terms, and he points out to Rand and Brooks that the mission is going to be very difficult, not just because of whatever they're doing, but because of the rain, the heat,
the terrain. Yeah, he's just saying, like, it's a hazardous environment, and if you're not ready for that kind of environment, it's going to be miserable. And you could die just from, a mosquito bite or a certain animal coming at you and you just don't realize it.
Right, and I think rightly so, he's looking at Randa and Brooks and realizing that these guys probably haven't dealt with that much in their lives.
They're clearly, been behind a desk.
Right, that this might be a big lift saving them from a jungle, and so he demands 5 times the original payment that they were going to give him, plus a bonus if they all survive, which... I'm going to go ahead and guess that he doesn't get at the end of this movie.
Well, he demands it up front. Well, I mean, there's still people from Monarch who survive.
Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen this movie, I don't really feel that bad, though, because it came out in 2017. Then we flick again. This whole movie is just scene transitions. We flick again to a photographer developing film in a dark room. She gets a phone call saying that she's being offered the Lancet job, and she gets the details on where to go and what time to show up and everything like that. We then flick to a boat, a big military boat, and we see everybody showing up. We see Conrad, the tracker, we see the photographer walking up, we see the military guys milling around. They're mostly complaining because they're upset that they were 1 day away from being sent home, and instead they're having to go on this mission. One of them, Mills, in particular, wants to go to Key West. Anyways, the photographer gets to the boat to check in, and the guy who checks her in, we finally get to learn her name because he's surprised that Mason Weaver is a girl.
Mason's not a gender-neutral name.
No, not... Well, especially I don't think in the 70s, which is when this timeline is taking place. I don't think it was...
I've never even heard of a girl named Mason.
Yeah, I don't think it was too common to stumble across them. Name.
But yeah, this is actually where you find out, too, that, this is a Marvel movie before... It was a Marvel movie because it has Loki, Miss Marvel or Captain Marvel, and Nick Fury all in one group. This is what happened to Nick Fury before he was Nick Fury.
This is how he loses that eye.
Yeah.
All right. So then we're inside the ship and they do a debriefing mission where they explain the island is surrounded by a permanent storm. They're supposed to fly through the storm in their helicopters, then drop seismic charges to map the subsurface of the island. The plan is then to get out of the helicopters and explore the island, and then they are all supposed to meet at the North Shore for an extraction team. So then our next scene is the ship arriving at what is the edge of that permanent storm, and it looks terrifying. And I maintain if there is a storm that never goes away surrounding an island, that's because God doesn't want you to go there.
Yeah, it's sealed off for a reason. And I gotta tell you, the balls on the pilots that are going through this are insane. Because I can tell you right now, if I saw that, but nope. You can have your money back. Send me back. I'm not going.
It is literally just a wall of purple and black clouds with lightning. It looks rough. And
I'm willing to go to the brig to not go to that. And then when all those people die, I'm like, are you guys going to let me out or not? Because clearly I'm not stupid.
Not a pilot, no flying experience, but I'm going to say that it's just not a good plan to fly into a black storm full of lightning.
I don't need to be a helicopter pilot to tell you when stupid is stupid.
They discuss that concerning wall of thunder and lightning, and Packard decides that the mission will continue as planned, so they all load up into the helicopters and fly through the storm. They all do make it out to the other side okay, which is good. In essence, that they get to continue bad, as we see later on in the movie as we go through. As they get to the other side, they start to drop the bombs from the helicopter, and then we're seeing that kind of, we're seeing a lot of scenery, and they're all making jokes in the radios, and then all of a sudden, we see a palm tree flying through the air, and it takes out a helicopter, like, zoom. Helicopter gone. And then we get our first look at all of Kong, and we see him just start to smack around a bunch of helicopters.
He was swatting the helicopters like flies.
It goes very badly, very quickly, and it's just mass pandemonium. Everybody's crashing.
And if we're being real, none of these people would have survived any of these accidents. The few people who jumped out and used parachutes, they might have survived, but the people who crashed in the helicopters, there's no way they survived.
Even then, the few people who jumped out with parachutes, for the most part, get squished by Kong.
Oh yeah, he collapsed.
There are 3 groups who survive. The first group is our military survivors, who are Colonel Packard, Mills, or Key West, a guy named Cole, a guy named Relis, and then a guy named Jerry, who we don't really actually get introduced to Jerry, but he's in a pivotal scene later on. Lancet, Steve, who is a scientist and is also the actor who plays Kevin from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And then we see Bill Randa is with this group. Packard's goal is to get to his pilot Chapman, and the helicopter Chapman went down with, because that helicopter has a bunch of weapons that he can use to get revenge on Kong.
Yeah, it has all the ammunition and the napalm and fire.
There is a pretty funny scene after this where Mills is freaking out about what he keeps referencing as a giant monkey, and Cole is just calmly eating beans because, as he says, eating is for the living. Cole's dead inside.
Yeah, Cole's clearly seen some shit in Vietnam, and his fucks are out the window.
Our next group is the tracker Conrad, our photographer Weaver, a soldier named Slivko, our geologist Brooks, and a biologist named San Lin, and a Lancet scientist Victor Neves. And they decide their goal is to head north to meet the extraction team at the pickup point. So basically their goal is to get the hell out of Dodge, and Packard's goal is to blow up Kong.
So essentially there's 3 groups. There's like a military group, there's the tracker group,
and then sadly our last group is Jack Chapman, who is the only survivor out of his group. So he's all by himself. He does manage to get in contact with Packard on the radio, and Packard tells him to survey the area, but essentially stay put. They're coming for him and the weapons on his helicopter.
More specifically, the weapons. They don't mention that, but it becomes pretty obvious very quickly.
All right, and then we start seeing these 3 groups interact with the terrain. We see Conrad's group come across an absolutely giant water buffalo, and really react to that and look freaked out, but no shots are fired, and they walk away unscathed. That's fine. Then we see Packard's group walking through, this is our military group, what at first looks like bamboo, and unfortunately this is where we lose Jerry, who they never bothered to introduce to us really in the first place.
I mean, they knew he was going to die.
I only know his name is Jerry because I looked it up so that I'd have something to call him.
He's like credited.
Yeah. So, you know what, realistically, that might not even be his character name. That might be the actor's name. I don't know. Jerry dies horrifically, though. He gets impaled through the mouth by a spider leg.
The spider leg looks like bamboo. So when they think they're in a jungle full of bamboo, there's actually like a giant insect that's just hovering over them. And he literally gets his face curb stomped by this bamboo leg from this creature. It's super grisly.
It is, and that's how we lose Jerry. They all start shooting at the spider, and the spider guts land all over them, and that's kind of the end of their scene.
Well, eventually they start chopping at its legs until it gets chopped down to size so they can actually kill it. So, it's pretty brutal.
Unfortunately, our spider creature meets just a grisly end, as Jerry did. Alright, then it flicks back to Conrad's group, our tracker, and they come across the indigenous people of Skull Island, which are called Eewees. It gets a little tense until Hank Marlowe, who's played by John Riley, the older version of Hank Marlowe, interrupts and tells them it's okay and kind of explains that, they're not here to hurt you, everything's all good. I think he's probably really excited just to find some people who speak English and could maybe help him get off this hellhole of an island.
Yeah, he's just very sad. He's clearly been stuck on this island for like 40 years or 60 years?
Way too long. Then we switch to Chapman, who is at a river, or maybe an inlet from the ocean. Yeah. He's filling his canteen and washing his face off. Kong shows up to drink and wash off his injuries because he did have a couple like cuts from the blades of the helicopters, and they did fire guns at him, so I'm sure like at his size those are just itchy and irritating. While Kong is drinking from the water and washing his injuries, he comes across a giant octopus or maybe a squid. All you really see is tentacles in the water. And then they fight for a little bit, and then Kong basically squishes its face in, and then has a delicious calamari-themed snack. We switch again, and we're back to Conrad's group. Marlowe, the soldier who his plane went down during World War II, is filling in the group all about the island, how Kong actually isn't the bad guy, and that the Iwis think of him as a god because he stops the creatures that like to eat the Iwis, and he prevents them from taking over the island. And this is the first time we hear about what Marlowe calls skull crawlers.
Fucking ugly.
Yeah,
like
they are pretty disturbing looking.
They're like lizards that don't have... They're like a cross between like a snake and a lizard. Because they have arms, but no legs. They have like a little long tail thing. And they don't have eyes. It's literally like their head is the skull, but it's not hollow. It's really creepy looking.
I'm sort of thinking that maybe they have eyes that are just like really deep set in there that we can't see. But they are disturbing looking. They did a good job on that.
Yeah, very mole-like. Where like they have eyes, but they don't use them to see.
Yeah. But to be fair, I mean, they do mostly live underground. Because if they come up on the ground, Kong squishes them.
Yeah.
Alright, so then we flick back again to Packard's group, our military group, and they are wading through a swampish area. It's full of these pterodactyl-looking birds. They're mostly just joking around about how awful this place is, and can't fault them. They're right, especially for a group of men who were supposed to go home.
Right? These dudes literally should be home, and the jackass of a colonel decided, hey, we're gonna do one more mission.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you, being raised in Florida, it would take a lot after some of the stuff they've seen. I mean, they just lost Jerry to death by spider leg to make me wade through that water.
Oh, yeah, I would be terrified.
It is very green and very swampy.
I'm already terrified of being in, like, gross water because ever since you hear about those, like, little fish in the Amazon that crawl up your urethra... No, thank you. Don't want to be in any unknown water.
Well, even in, where we're from in Florida originally, Sam and I, we live in Arizona now, but we grew up in Florida. Just as a general rule of thumb, if you can't see your feet, there's alligators in it.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
So, anyways, we then transition back to Conrad's group, and Marlowe and Gunpei were trying to make a boat out of their salvaged airplane parts. And they were making pretty good progress until Gunpei was eaten by a skull crawler, or at least killed, because it does look like he has some sort of grave there, so I'm thinking they managed to salvage some body parts. Slivko, the only military person who's in their group, is good at mechanics because his dad was a mechanic, and so he starts helping to complete the boat, and it looks like they're making good progress. Weaver is taking photos, and she's been taking photos really throughout this whole movie, and as part of like the visual effects, you do see periods where like she'll snap a photo and it'll show what she took a picture of.
It's clearly for some cinematic effects, so you can like kind of see what they're seeing. I feel like this is a very...
it's an artistic moment in the movie.
It feels very Nico Tatopoulos taking random snapshots.
It does, but I appreciate it.
At least at least this is her job, right? Yeah. She went there specifically to take pictures. Photos.
I appreciate the visual artistry it provides in the movie. Anyways, Weaver wanders outside of this wall the Iwis have erected, made out of logs mostly. And then on the other side of the wall, you can see that they've set some of the logs at an angle, and they all have red tips, which should concern her more than it does.
Yeah, it's like they're literally dripping with blood. Yeah. And she's just out there, let's take some pictures.
Yeah. And so she sees a water buffalo that's been trapped by part of a helicopter and tries to move it. That's not successful because she's a very small person, and it's a huge helicopter. But Kong comes along and moves the helicopter so the buffalo can be freed. They kind of share a moment, and then Kong walks away. And then this is probably the first time in the movie where we see this group starting to think of Kong as not the bad guy.
Yeah, less of a villain and more of a, he's just defending his home, right? We're the invaders.
At this point, we then transition back to Packard's group, And then it briefly shows them looking at Kong's bloody handprint on the side of a cliff. And then right before it transitions back to Chapman, who's all by himself. He's been writing letters to his son Billy this whole time. He puts his knife and his letters, and it looks like maybe his canteen, on a tree. He's then sitting on this log. The log starts to move. He gets off the log because, understandably, he's a little freaked out.
It's a giant stick bug.
Yes, it is an insect. So he panics, shoots at it, and the stick bug leaves. And then he, takes his breath of relief, and then out of nowhere, zoop, he's eaten. And we get our first look at a skull crawler in the movie.
Creepy. I feel sad for Chapman, because like I said, I always feel like his death was unnecessary. If they were going to just kill him, don't give us backstory. I don't want to be sad. That was like the whole point. The whole point of his like character was to make you feel for him, because he's like, my wife and son are set up in Atlanta. As soon as I get back, they're already there. I'm going to meet them there. We're going to start a new life in Atlanta. And he's been like trying to figure out how to write this letter to his son through like the whole movie. And then turns out it doesn't matter because you're going to be dead.
Yeah, this movie does a good job of making you care about the characters so that you feel for them when they die. They give them all a lot of backstory, which is not always typical in these types of movies. A lot of times it's just mass carnage with no names. It's more Jerry's than anything else.
Lots of random extras getting sliced and diced.
Alright, and then in contrast to Chapman's brutal death, we then see everyone watching a lovely Aurora Borealis, including Kong, and it kind of flicks between all the groups that are still alive watching this. We see Randa tell Packard that this mission is a mistake, and that it's one thing to go and recover Chapman, but trying to get the weapons to attack Kong is just wrong. And you can kind of see that Packard's really starting to lose it here by how he responds to Randa. Alright, then it flicks back to Conrad's group. They sail away in the plane/boat. Marlowe joins them. Slivko jokingly calls it a float when he's able to contact Packard's group on the radio. And they all cheer. They're all very excited to hear from Packard, because at this point, none of them have been in contact with each other than just Packard and Chapman. So as far as they know, they were the only survivors. So they're all happy to find out more people have survived. Unfortunately, this is when a group of those pterodactyl-looking birds swoop in and grab the one Lancet scientist with their group, Neves, and they just tear him apart mid-air.
Yeah, Duke gets his arm ripped off, like, while he's still being, like, bitten and carried. And I think it's one of those situations where in the distance they look like little tiny birds, and like you don't think anything of it until they're right up on you. So that must have been, because like birds make sounds when they're flapping their wings, especially with the size that they are. The fact that they can lift a grown-ass man off a boat.
Well, so these are prehistoric looking birds. Yeah, I would go ahead and say that if birds. I was better with my prehistoric animals and fossils, that they have an actual name that's not just pterodactylish bird.
Yeah, we essentially, anything with wings we call pterodactyl.
They might actually be a legit, like, fossilized record. That being said, normal modern birds are terrifying, so let's not make them bigger with sharper, crazier beaks and claws.
Oh yeah, they pretty much lift this dude straight the fuck up and then tear him apart mid-air.
100%. If our chickens were giant, they would eat us.
I really feel like they were trying to make this like into a pseudo-horror movie on top of a monster movie.
Well, and unfortunately, you can tell Marlowe's been here a long time because he's like, well, moving on.
Yeah, he's just thinking of
Can't save him. We keep sailing. And so that's pretty much what they do. They keep sailing. They're able to connect with Packard's group. They don't know that Chapman's dead yet, but he's dead. So we're basically down to our two groups. They have become one. Packard convinces Conrad that they need to go get Chapman. They all agree and they set off together. And then they come across a valley full of greenish haze and smoke and giant bones.
Yeah, it's essentially like the graveyard from Lion King.
Yeah,
it's an elephant graveyard.
Some of these bones are just clearly Kong's relatives. You can tell from the shape of the skulls. It doesn't really say what the greenish smoke is, but it does appear to be flammable. We see Cole try to light a cigarette and blow himself up just a little bit.
Yeah, there has to have been some kind of like sulfuric gushers somewhere. Yeah. I gotta tell you, if I'm surrounded by, like, I would not walk into like green green gas unless I had to, right?
No, well, and even if I was walking through that green gas, my first instinct wouldn't be to light a cigarette.
Yeah, like,
but
what
you
is
know
wrong
what?
with you?
Cole's dead inside, so that's why he didn't care.
Yeah, he just don't. He don't care about nothing.
So while they're in this, Randa and Weaver are taking photos because I guess the opportunity's there. When a skull crawler attacks the group, while they're hiding from it, Conrad discovers that this is the skull crawler who ate Chapman because it vomits up his skull and his dog tags. They all work to run and hide and fight off the skull crawler, and they do appear to be successful for a minute. And then I'm not sure if he was trying to take a photo or if the flash just malfunctioned.
No, he tried to take a picture. He took a picture, and the flash just kept flashing.
Yeah. The flash malfunctions, and we see Bill Randa die. And then when the skull crawler eats him, because of the flashing camera, we can see his belly and still flashing through the green smoke. Weaver, the photographer, is able to light some of the gas on fire, and she lights the skull crawler on fire.
Yeah, I can't remember how she did it, but she
with that lighter because it doesn't go out.
Oh yeah, she had like a Zippo lighter,
like an old school lighter, because this is the 70s.
Yeah, so she just keeps the flame, throws the lighter, and it hits the thing, and it just catches on fire.
They all get through this valley of green smoke, where they're like, okay, we gotta go get Chapman, and then Conrad lets Packard know, and unfortunately, because he's got his dog tags now, that Chapman is dead. And then this is when Packard essentially reveals that he doesn't care because his real plan all along was to get to the weapons so that he can kill Kong and avenge his fallen men. Marlowe, hearing this, reacts badly, and that explains that killing Kong would lead to the skull crawlers all coming out of the earth and just running rampant. Packard refuses to listen. Conrad is able to convince him to at least let the civilians go back to the boat, and so the two groups split up again. And then Slivko ends up going with Packard's group, and then so does, his name isn't Kevin, but I'm going to call him Kevin. Kevin, the one Lancet scientist, also go with Packard's group. Conrad, Weaver, and Marlowe stop on their way back to the boat and decide that they need to try to save Kong and that it's not right to let Packard kill him. And so they send Brooks and the other scientists back to the float.
The two Monarch scientists, right? They both go back. Okay.
Yeah. With instructions that no matter what, they leave at dawn. Which, not bad instructions given all of the giant things that would like to eat you on this island. So then we see Packard's group lures Kong with the remaining seismic charges, and then they incapacitate him with ignited napalm. And then Conrad, Weaver, and Marlowe intervene, and after a standoff, persuade the other soldiers to spare Kong, with Slivko cracking first. But even with that, Packard refuses to yield. And this is where we see the big skull crawler that they've been talking about this whole movie being concerned about. It emerges from the lake, and that forces everyone to pretty much to run, except Packard, because he's completely unhinged at this point.
Yeah, he'll give up.
He is preparing to detonate big charges, but Kong squishes him with his hand, and so that just doesn't happen. The skull crawler overpowers Kong briefly and starts to chase the group. Cole is another very sad death. Cole tries to sacrifice himself by attempting to get the skull crawler to eat him because he's holding grenades. And the plan would be that when the skull crawler swallows him, the grenades will go off and blow him up from the inside.
He pulled the pins out and was holding the handle. And all you have to do is, once he dies, he'll let go. And it should explode in its face. It doesn't eat him. It tail whips him into a cliff. And then...
Then we explode.
Yeah. It's really unfortunate because, he could have just kept running. He didn't stall that at all.
No, he didn't. And just these skull crawlers, they look like they skip leg day every day because they don't have legs. So they're just he just pivots and woof, bye-bye Cole.
Yeah, it literally didn't even stop. It kept running. So it did a 360, tail whipped him, and then kept chasing after the group. It was impressive, to be honest.
Then we see Kong catches up, and he and the skull crawler start to fight again. We see, once again, which seems to be a theme in these movies, Kong start to do a bit of a jaw wrench here. It doesn't work out, and then Kong gets he falls somehow and gets tangled in some boat chains and is stuck in those chains. And so the skull crawlers continue to try to eat the humans. Luckily, though, the group that went to the float come back and are shooting the skull crawler with a gun.
Yeah, 250 cals that are mounted together. They're in tandem, so you can hit both buttons at the same time.
This obviously is not doing much damage to the skull crawler, but upsets it. So it starts to turn towards the Plote group. And then we see Weaver is up on a cliff and she shoots a flare into the creature's skull pocket or eye. Not totally sure. That hurts it and distracts it a little bit. Enough that Kong is able to break free of the chains, and he whips a boat propeller into the creature's shoulder and then strangles it just a little bit with the chain before the chain breaks. And then he slams it into the cliff, which sends Weaver into the water below. And then we flick back and forth for a little bit between Kong fighting the Skullcrawler and Weaver sinking in the water. And then Kong uses the boat propeller as brass knuckles and just is beating the shit out of the Skullcrawler.
He goes to town, giving him the hands.
And it does look like he kills it for a second because it kind of collapses. And then he reaches in the water to retrieve Weaver. And then while he's doing that and he's holding her, the Skullcrawler, not dead, attacks him again. Kong rips out his tongue, which was gruesome.
By the way, he would have squished Wheeler. Or what's her name?
Weaver.
He's like holding her while he's fighting the Skullcrawler and like bashing with his other hand, obviously, but his one hand is like in a fist. So it's like, there's no way she didn't get squished while he's like, she should have been pancake.
Probably. If not squished, I would think moving her around that much.
Yeah, the jerking alone.
Good.
Yeah, the jerking alone. Yeah, the jerking alone would have definitely.
That's what she said.
Would have finished her off.
We're adults.
No pun intended.
Alright, so while he's jerking Weaver, the Skullcrawler like wraps its tongue around his forearm, and Kong rips his tongue out, and that is how the Skullcrawler, this big one, dies. So we see then Kong puts Weaver on the shore where she coughs up some water and wakes up. Conrad comes to her, yay, she's alive. All the survivors reunite, and then they drive the Plote away to reach the rendezvous point and leave the island as Kong watches. We can assume that they all were successful in leaving the island because in the credits we see Marlowe reunite with his wife and meet his son for the first time, who is obviously, his son looks very grown at this point. And then we see him watching a Cubs game while enjoying a hot dog.
Which gets referenced earlier in the movie. He's like, nothing's better than a beer and a hot dog. So you see him crack open a beer and eat a hot dog.
Yeah. And then in a post-credit scene, we see that Monarch has detained Conrad and Weaver and has them in like a little
an interrogation room.
And they're being informed by Lynn and Brooks that Kong is not the only Monster King. And we see a bunch of cave paintings of one is clearly Godzilla and the others are various Mutos.
Yeah, like Mothra, Hydra.
Yeah, and then that's how that movie ends. So, Sam, overall thoughts on this movie?
It was a good movie. I won't say it was bad, but like I'm probably, while we're talking about the whole Godzilla-verse movies, probably going to compare them to which ones I like the most. And 2014 was really good, so I don't think this one measures up. A lot of the parts of the movie just felt, I don't know, Hollywood just be doing Hollywood stuff where they add scenes that like get you emotionally involved but then just kill off the characters, and we're never going to reference these characters again. I would have been okay with a little more background on Monarch, and they don't ever really explain what the other scientist group
No,
is.
They never do explain
like,
what Lancet's doing there. Like, why does Kevin from 99 there?
Yeah, are they contracted with the military? Are they like the military scientists? Like, there's a lot of just like stuff they threw in there that don't really ever get explained.
So you know what's worse is I think, what if those poor guys genuinely just were surveyors and they had no idea? Monarch at least kind of had a clue what they were doing.
They knew what they were getting into, but
and the military guys are used to being in the shit. What if these dudes really were just desk junkies thinking they were going to go map some rocks?
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of just things that didn't make sense. At least in 2014, every scene, all the people that were involved, most of the time they had some kind of cohesion to the story, or they had a reason for being there, or they explained why they were there. That didn't happen a lot in Kong. A lot of it was just like, oh, look, this island that's not supposed to be touched by humanity. There's these people here who don't talk and live like side by side with all these prehistoric creatures. Yeah, it's not there's too much that just doesn't track right in the movie. But ultimately, I like the movie, but yeah.
I like the movie. I disagree. I think this movie was pieced out so significantly that it was hard to even skip a scene because it affected the next scene so much.
Everything did tie together.
Yeah, it all tied together, I felt like. That being said, this movie did work really hard to make you care about the characters, so it was a little more devastating when they died, with the exception of Jerry, who just didn't matter.
Yeah, I'd say in 2014, people just died left and right, but you didn't know them, so you didn't care.
Right, whereas this movie, they really went out of their way to really hammer home, especially for the military guys, that they were very close to getting to reunite with their family and loved ones, and instead got sent on this mission to die a pointless death.
Yeah, there were a lot less people in this movie as a whole, so you kind of got to know the characters better. Because in 2014, there's so many scenes where there's like people being evacuated. There's like the hospital scene where there's like a ton of people being moved around. There's so many people. You're only invested in the main characters, so you don't really care a lot about the side characters. This one was a much more intimate movie because there was like maybe 20 people that we're all paying attention to. So like you kind of pay attention to every single character. So when a character dies, you're like, oh, I kind of like that guy. Why did he have to die?
You were rooting for them to live, essentially. But overall, good movie. So your top 3 worst deaths in this movie, Sam?
Oh, the spider death was definitely like number 1. That one was pretty bad. John Goodman's death was also pretty bad.
That's Randa.
When he gets snapped up. Outside of that one, Chapman. I mean, Chapman's death is just sad in general. It wasn't really brutal because he just like almost instantly dies, but it was pretty sad just because of like all the other stuff that was going on.
All right, so I'm gonna rate my top 3 deaths as actually number 1 being Neves, because he was carried off by pterodactyl birds and pulled apart in midair, which was not as sudden as some of our other deaths. I feel like it hurt a little bit more.
That one was so random though, like. They were perfectly safe and fine, and somehow he gets snapped up.
I think the point of his death was to prove that you're never safe on Skull Island.
Agreed.
So, Neves for my number 1. I'm sorry, Jerry looking up to just drink his water bottle and getting through the face.
Getting stepped on? Yeah.
So, Jerry number 2, and then, so Chapman's death made me the saddest, but I'm going to rate my number 3 as Cole, just because he tried so hard to, like, do the right thing and save everybody, and it didn't work.
Yeah, it was sad.
So, my number 3 is Cole, and then 4 will be Chapman, just because his death really hit me in the feels.
Yeah.
All right. And so that is Kong Skull Island. If you'd like to watch the movie, you can find it on many streaming services.
Mainly Prime.
Yeah.
Prime's the easy one. Everything's on Prime.
But if you liked what you heard and you'd like to continue listening to our podcast, leave us a review and 5 stars, but only nice ones.
And if you want to hear a monster moment, stick around.
Yeah. Bye. On today's Monsterverse moment, in honor of our geologist, Dr. Houston Brooks, we will be talking about the Hollow Earth theory. So, in the movie, Dr. Houston Brooks was an Ivy League student who wrote his thesis on the Hollow Earth theory, proposing that the undiscovered subterranean pockets exist all over the world. And even though they laughed at him and mocked him for his theory, William Randa from Monarch believed him and recruited him for the organization, hence everything we see that happens in Skull Island. In a nutshell, the Hollow Earth theory says that the Earth is a shell and is entirely hollow, or it contains a lot of inside space. So, this theory dates all the way back to the 17th century, actually. Yeah, and so while Dr. Brooks isn't a real person, there are others who are real people where this theory originated. The first person, at least on record, is English astronomer Edmund Halley. He presented his hypothesis in a paper titled An Account of the Cause of the Change of the Variation of the Magnetic Needle.
God, that's a mouthful.
Yes, it is. To the Royal Society in 1692. So that's actually how far this back goes.
The Royal Society, like England's like scientific board or whatever.
And so the reason that he started looking into this is because science was so new back then, and they didn't understand why. They understood that the Earth had a magnetic field, but they didn't understand why it fluctuated. And so he was trying to find a way to explain that, more or less.
Trying to find plausible theories for
yes, because this is the 17th century. They didn't have.
Yeah, they don't have the same kind of like technology or instrumentation that we have now to be able to take readings and stuff.
He proposed that the Earth consists of a hollow shell with 2 inner concentric shells and an innermost core. So what that would look like is essentially like 3 rings and then a circle.
Yeah, it's kind of like a journey to the center of the earth.
Yes, that's exactly what it looks like. And Halley believed that while the exterior of the earth had its own magnetic north and south poles, there must be 4 poles in total. At the center of his hollow earth is a core, and he argued that that core would also have its own north and south poles. If that core rotated at a different speed than the exterior shell, the interactions between the poles would explain the shifting magnetic fields on Earth that he and his fellow scientists were observing. So his diagrams depicted layers between the inner concentric circles in the core of the Earth. He thought that in between these layers there would be various atmospheres and ecosystem, because at that time, keep in mind in 1692, very religious. So it was just generally believed that all planets must be capable of supporting life, because that's the work of an almighty God. And that he argued that accommodating more creations inside of the Earth and not just on the outside was just God being better, more efficient at using his space.
Yeah, just more creatures for each layer.
Yep. Like what our kids do with their toys. You know,
Yes.
just stack them all up. So, and if Edmund Halley's name sounds familiar to you, it's because Halley's Comet is named after him.
Oh, I did not know that.
And even though this theory has been proven to be false, he has many other discoveries that were actually legit. Like, he was a legit scientist.
He did work.
Yeah. And so, while he wasn't the first person to see the comet, he was the first person to suggest that the comet seen in 1531, 1607, and 1682 were actually all the same comet. And then he predicted that we would see it again in late 1758 or possibly very early January 1759. The comet was seen on Christmas night in 1758, just as he predicted. And so, while unfortunately Halley died in 1742, so he never got to see that, the fact that he predicted it was seen as a big accomplishment for Newtonian physics and the scientific method, so the comet was named after him in his honor.
It probably set a lot of things in work once people realized, like, oh, hey, like, this is a consistent thing. If this is consistent, what else is, right?
Yeah.
Because before, they always assumed that everything they saw was like a one-time thing. And that, oh, we'll never see this again.
Well, in comets in particular, because of all of the religious aspects in this time period, particularly around science, were seen as like miraculous acts of God.
Yeah, they were seen as like symbols or like prophecies.
Yeah, and so for someone to come along and say, no, actually I think this is just the same thing rotating, was a big deal.
Which probably also gave more credence to the fact that the Earth was round.
It gave credence to a lot of things. So Edmund Halley, actually a very legit scientist, although not entirely correct on everything, because, you know, it's...
Well, I mean, they were theories.
Century.
They weren't like concrete. Yeah. So it's not like he was claiming, oh, this is 100% what's going on.
Yeah, we're going to fast forward a little bit to the 19th century to Army Captain John Cleve Sims Jr., and he proposed a theory that the Earth consisted of a hollow shell about 800 miles thick, with openings approximately 1,400 miles wide at each of the poles, the North and South Pole. These openings became known as Sims holes. Yeah. So there's a lot of jokes there. You guys do with that information what you will. And so he's very proud of his holes, this John Sims.
He's trying to not make sure they don't get filled.
So he believed the Earth was hollow because he theorized that the centrifugal force resulting from the Earth's rotation would naturally flatten the poles and cause these holes. These holes would have large openings that would provide access to a habitable inner Earth. He envisioned a hollow planet with concentric spheres inside, accessible through these Sims holes.
You should just say Sims holes.
Yeah.
Accessible through Sims holes.
Yep. So Sims was so convinced of his theory and that he was right, in April 1818, he financed the printing and distribution of about 500 pamphlets outlining his beliefs. He then distributed these pamphlets to everywhere he could, primarily like colleges and organizations and places of science, things along those natures. In these pamphlets, he stated, and I quote, "I declare the earth is hollow and habitable within, containing a number of solid concentric spheres, one within the other, and that it is open at the poles, 12 or 16 degrees. I pledge my life in support of this truth, and I am ready to explore the hollow if the world will support and aid me in the undertaking. Which to me says that while our original astronomer, Edmund Halley, was a legit man of science, this man...
He was a crackpot. This dude got laughed out of every bar that he tried to solicit in, I guarantee you.
Feels to me has a little bit more of like cult leader vibes. And to pay for the printing and distribution of 500 pamphlets back then was no small feat. That's actually very expensive.
Yeah, I'd imagine that cost a pretty penny.
In 1818, he paid a pretty penny for that. So in 1822, he appealed to the U.S. Congress with this theory and asked them to fund an expedition to prove the existence of the habitable inner space. But his petition was tabled in March, and in December of 1823, he submitted similar petitions to both houses of Congress, which were rejected. In 1824, he petitioned the General Assembly of Ohio to recommend his expedition plans to Congress, but this request was indefinitely postponed. Very cult leader vibes, doesn't it?
Jesus, he was going everywhere, dude.
He believed in it.
Yeah, he was pushing that message. He was like, "Yo, it's hollow. I swear. Just give me the money. I'll go investigate myself."
He was passionate, and to remind you, he's an army captain, so he had a career.
He probably had some sway too, because like you don't get to. Actually, I lie. You can get to captain pretty easy because that's just an O3.
I
don't know about back then.
I was about to say I'm unfamiliar with the military structure in 1818.
Well, I'm sure back then, like your reach was probably much further than it is now.
But still, I mean, this is some persistence. He believed in his theory.
He was adamant for
sure.
So,
despite the fact that the government really, I'm gonna assume, reacted the way our current government does when people show up at open meetings.
Him.
Yes, they were incredibly disinterested. Sims was determined. So, to garner his support for his journey to the North Pole, he toured a lot of the Midwest. The press mostly made fun of him, similar to how we do today on the internet. Basically, they turned him into a meme, an 1818 meme. But the public really enjoyed going to his presentations and in general actually seemed to believe his claims.
Yeah, I was like, who believed?
Eventually, he garnered the support of an Ohio newspaper editor, Jeremiah Reynolds, who actually has some fame on his own because this is the newspaper editor that had connections to Edgar Allan Poe. But I'm not going to go into that tangent today. He joined Sims in 1825 on a lecture tour that covered the Appalachian Mountains. Their goal was to convince enough people of Sims' theory that they could raise funds for this expedition to go explore Sims' holes. Seems like they could have just gone to a bar to do that, but unfortunately, though, Sims and Reynolds had a falling out and they split up. And it actually allegedly was so bad that they almost got into a duel over whatever this fight was about. And then Sims passed away on May 28th, 1829 in Hamilton, Ohio at the age of 48. So he actually never had an opportunity to search for his holes. And so even though they had their falling out, in 1836, Reynolds was actually able to lobby Congress to fund an expedition to the South Pacific. And that was approved. And he didn't sail on that expedition. A lot of other people did. The Great United States Exploring Expedition surveyed coastal Antarctica, confirming that it's a continent. They produced more than 200 charts, which became the basis of the Hydrographic Office's collection. They collected thousands of specimens that contributed to the core collections of the Smithsonian Institute and furthered a ton of research. This also set a precedence for the government to fund expeditions for scientific research and exploration. So it actually had a pretty impact on science as we know today, which was all basically started by a cult leader who didn't have enough money to take his believers with him to explore his holes. This idea of a hollow earth has been kept alive in popular culture through various literature and media. Great example, the movie we just watched, Kong Skull Island, a pretty well-known book, Journey to the Center of the Earth, which has also been turned into a movie. I think twice now, actually. I think there's two. They remade it, right?
But yeah, I know for sure there's two. Because I know was it Brendan Fraser in the more recent one?
Well, I don't know how recent it is, but he's in one of them. And so modern science doesn't support hollow earth theory because of many scientific studies and data around seismic waves, gravity, magnetic fields, geology, aka rocks, volcanic activity, satellites, space exploration, Antarctic and Arctic explorations. And I'm not going to go into the details of why all of those things don't support the hollow earth theory. That's for Google to do. It's fairly safe to say that if you were to dig down into 800 feet into the earth, you are not going to find different atmospheres. That being said, it's still fun to think about, and it does make for good movie concepts.
People are crazy.
No, in a different world with a little bit more money, this man would have absolutely been a cult leader, and he would have a huge 100%. Internet following. Can you imagine?
Well, like, it's one of those things, too, where people refuse to let things go, and, like, dude, we've proven this, but there's still people out there, you know how the internet is, that are like, oh, 100%, there's, like, 3 different layers, different atmospheres, and it's like, look, my guy, you know how many billionaires there are on this planet right now? You don't think one of them was like, you know what? Let's build a giant drill as deep as we can. Yeah, they could do it, they would. We have people sending people up into space. If they want to get to the center of the earth, they could get there.
He missed his time period. He was born a little too soon.
Yeah, he needed to wait a couple centuries. He'd have been gold.
But this is essentially where these theories come from, is these two men separated by many, many years. All right, I hope you enjoyed tonight's monster moment, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.